Just because you're not paranoid doesn't mean they're not really after you. So, I want to talk about something that just keeps intermittently cropping up in my comment section, usually in regards to DCEU movies, though it also came up in regards to Star Wars The Last Jedi, and it's this ongoing belief of some people that critics are bribed and that ratings through things like Rotten Tomatoes or whatnot are rigged, and there is a big conspiracy to ensure that certain studios get positive critical reviews while other ones get negative. And I want to talk about that in specifics because it's ridiculous. And I want to explain why, and not just sort of wave my finger at, but I also want to talk about it here so I don't ever have to talk about it again, ideally. So let's look at the assertions. So the general assertion seems to be that when some movies that some people either believe are good get very negative reviews, or some movies that certain people believe are not good get very positive reviews, that can't simply be a difference of opinion, that there is a pattern, and where there's a pattern there must be some mechanism, there's something manipulating, there's a reason why this happened. Now, personally, I tend to subscribe to Occam's razor. All things being equal, the simplest explanation is usually correct. And the simplest explanation is the opinion you had about a piece of media is different from what critics had. I don't understand why that's such a bizarre concept for some people to accept. And I say that as someone who does disagree with critics. I have a lot of problems with Star Wars The Last Jedi. It's got a 90-something on Rotten Tomatoes. Doesn't mean I think that there's a conspiracy to ensure a plus 90 rating. And actually, let's talk about Rotten Tomatoes real quick, just to get it off the table. So, anyone who's thinking that Rotten Tomatoes is the source of the problem probably doesn't really know how the aggregate site works, which is that they are not generating the reviews. They are bringing together the reviews that are out there being done by various outlets and professional critics and assigning a value for a percentage of how many said it was good versus how many said it was bad. They are not creating the data, they are simply compiling it. Now, theoretically, you can make an argument that that data can still be manipulated in the same way that any census taker, survey taker, person putting together statistics can manipulate data depending on how you ask the questions, how you choose to compile it. But Rotten Tomatoes is pretty transparent about their process, and more to the point, it's not like they're going to people asking them these weirdly worded or loaded questions with their thoughts on movies. They're looking at and compiling the published, publicly available reviews of critics. So in the case of Rotten Tomatoes, they're the messenger. They aren't creating the message, they are just making it easy to see in one place what the general consensus is, if there is one. And more to the point, if Rotten Tomatoes was in on this conspiracy, it wouldn't be weighted in favor of Disney, which is usually where the accusations go that Disney is buying off critics, because Disney is on a pretty solid streak lately as far as critical appraisal goes. But if Rotten Tomatoes was the source of the problem, trust me, they'd be favoring Warner Brothers, because Warner Brothers has a partial stake in Fandango, which is the parent company of Rotten Tomatoes. That was why it was so iffy that Rotten Tomatoes withheld putting up the percentage for Justice League until the day it premiered. But again, they weren't changing the message. They did delay how long they would until they put it out there, but let's clear Rotten Tomatoes off the table. So, as I said, Disney tends to be the big target of these conspiracy theories, and I don't mean to use that as a belittling term, but I mean that's what they are. People are believing that there is a conspiracy of bribery between Disney and critics. So let's just think about this for a second. There are at this point hundreds of professional critics watching and reviewing movies, major movies released by a company like Disney. So if they are bribing critics, that means that they are going to, if not every, let's say 80% Or you know what? Let's go a little, let's go 75%. They're going to say 75% of critics and bribing them in some form to ensure a positive review on their movies to boost that, and or paying them to give negative reviews to the competition. The very idea that you would come to that conclusion, that's a completely results-based conclusion. You looked at something and came up with, well, it must be this, and then you tried to work backwards to try and justify that, because there's no evidence. The only quote-unquote evidence is how highly rated Disney movies are and how low rated some other films from some other studios can be, although not always. So that's basically the bulk of the evidence. And that's a big problem for me, because if people are going to make claims like this, you need to realize there is no way that if 75% of critics were being bribed either to write negative or to write positive, that nobody has talked. And this is usually the fundamental problem in most conspiracy theories. How many people it would have to involve to actually function as a conspiracy makes it almost impossible that nobody would have blown the whistle on this. So, especially in terms of now you need to realize the kinds of critics that get aggregated onto Rotten Tomatoes, it's a pretty wide variety from, critics for the New York Times and, major television networks to rinky-dink little, local newspapers and medium-sized websites. It really runs the gamut. So you're telling me that Disney is approaching all these people from all these different backgrounds, from well-paid critics whose names are recognizable among moviegoers to little nobody's heard of them, whoever in podunk somewhere, and offering all of them something that they are willing to accept. Like, nobody has said no, nobody has turned them down. Because think about that. There should be somebody who would have gone, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I don't need the money, or no, my integrity as a reviewer is more important to me to that. And then why would they not say, hey, by the way, I was offered a bribe? Because if other people are taking this, they would want to blow the whistle on it. And again, I could buy the argument that you offer people money, the majority of them will take it. But all it would take would be one critic, just one, to go, no, and then immediately post on a blog with email or telephone or text correspondence proving what it was that happened. And it hasn't. And that's another thing. I'm not sure what people think is in it for either side. Because if Disney is offering a bribe that is sufficient enough that nobody has said no, which you have to assume would be the case, because like I said, if anybody has ever said no, they'd have every reason to blow the whistle on this. So if they're offering such a significant bribe that no one has ever said no, then this is costing them so damn much that whatever boost they think they're getting from the box office based off positive reviews, it's gotta be a wash at best. And that's ignoring the fact that outside sources, aside from Rotten Tomatoes, have determined that statistically speaking, that it's not even an inherently positive impact on the box office, or even an inherently negative one on the competition. Studios like to blame Rotten Tomatoes and blame critics right now, but the data doesn't bear that out. And then there's a question like, what would actually be in it for the critics? A temporary influx of income, but if it ever gets uncovered, which, as I'm saying, if it's as far-reaching as it would kind of have to be to ever work, would be almost guaranteed to be uncovered at some point, their entire career gets flushed down the toilet because they lose every scrap of integrity they ever had. Again, I'm not saying that there's nobody who would go for that deal, but I can't imagine that every critic would be going, yes, I will cash in my integrity, knowing that if it's ever uncovered, I will never get to work in this field again. And let's be honest, let's address some other things. Have there ever been situations where critics or other sort of influencers of people's buying habits have been bribed or coerced? Well, yeah. I mean, it happens in various degrees, in various industries, in various ways, but straight bribery hasn't really happened for a very long time. Like, honestly, the closest that things come at this point is probably in the video game industry, when video game publishers have like review retreats where they bring critics in, you know, and make sure they're put up at a nice hotel and give them plenty of time, hands-on time with the game, because it makes them, you know, they're not literally dictating you must review with an X number for our game, but they are creating a climate and a positive experience around them as a company and whatever game it is that they're promoting that will hopefully, in the critic's mind, link a general positive feeling to the game. It is a bit of a psychological manipulation in that sense. So that sort of stuff does go on, but like I said, video games do it, movies not so much, because you don't really get, yeah, I mean, there are press screenings, but they're not retreats. They're just, you go to the same theater you'd be going to if you were paying to get in. They're not overly lavish. They're not going to the degree that some industries have to just ensure that the critics are in a real good mood. And even if they did, like, that's going to be a minor thing at best, because no matter how good of a mood you're in, you see something crappy, you're still going to call it crap. Now, to be fair, there was a critic scandal in this century, in the 21st century. It was way back in the early 2000s, and it didn't involve Disney, it involved Sony. And what that was, in case you're younger than me, which, having looked at my analytics for my channel, chances are you are, then you probably don't remember this, but Sony created a fake critic for a fake newspaper and generated fake quotes from reviews that never existed and stuck them on posters for Rob Schneider's movie The Animal and for the Heath Ledger movie A Knight's Tale. That was all they did with it though, because they got caught real quick, which again kind of emphasizes my point. The last time that anything that could be called any kind of a direct critical manipulation attempt to fool or manipulate the system was done, it got busted like that after 2 instances. And again, to bribe enough critics to actually seriously impact something like a Rotten Tomatoes score, you'd have to be doing it with hundreds of them. Last time this crap got pulled, it got caught after 2. Again, there is no way. It doesn't hold up and it doesn't make sense. It's not a conclusion that you can come to based off the scientific method of looking at the evidence and what does the evidence point to. Because the only way you land here is by starting from the conclusion of, there must be a reason that these critics don't agree with me. And look, it's annoying to feel very strongly about a movie and realize that most people don't feel that way, and people who are paid to look at this stuff don't agree with you. And that's regardless of whether you love something that they all say is crap or whether you hate something that they all say is great. That is frustrating. Trust me, I get it. I mentioned The Last Jedi. It's happened to me with other movies. I don't get why everyone is head over heels for No Country for Old Men. I don't think it's bad, but I don't get it. I also really love G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra, and in a world where we can embrace dumb fun like the Fast and Furious franchise, it annoys me that we couldn't embrace this thing. But that said, I don't think there's any conspiracy behind either of those differences of opinion. And again, I really do understand the frustration, especially if something that you don't like continues to see a level of success that you don't understand. So if you don't like the Marvel movies, but you're watching them get praise and praise and praise and praise, that can start to weigh on you. You can start to feel like, God, it's like the world's telling me I'm wrong, and nobody wants to think that about themselves. And to flip it around, you really like the DC movies up to this point, and everything that's coming out is saying they're crap, they're crap, they're crap, they're crap. It almost starts to feel like a personal attack after a while, and you feel like you want to fight back. But it doesn't mean that there's anything there. There's no substance. There's no meat on this argument. There's only a conclusion. They're bribing critics. Where's your evidence? They have a different opinion from me. Anything else other than that? No! So guys, look, if you want to argue that critics are wrong, please, by all means, argue that critics are wrong. If you want to argue the merits of a maligned movie, please do that. If you want to point out the flaws of a praised movie, go for it. But can we stop? At the very least in my own comment section, can we just stop with this critics are bribed stuff. And also, you know what? I'll tell you what. I will make a pledge to you right now. If this channel ever grows to the point where I ever get invited to a press screening of any film, if anybody from any studio approaches me and offers me money in exchange for me giving a specific opinion, I will tell you all right now, and I will immediately go, you guys were right, there's a conspiracy, I know it, here's why. That is my pledge to you. I don't think that's a pledge I'm ever gonna have to pay out though, because again, I can't imagine that there's never been anybody who doesn't feel the same way I do, which is that film and critical analysis is more important than one paycheck. I can't be the only one. There's got to be somebody. So if we could please give that one a rest. But with great trepidation, I will now say, what do you think about all this? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to do all the things like subscribe. I'm on Twitter. I have 2 podcasts. I got an email. All that stuff is linked down below. And until next time, this council is adjourned.